Right, so today we're looking at the archaeology of Caligula. Now, people have got their own thoughts about Caligula, and they've got their own mindset and what they feel about the emperor. And I think the best thing I can do is start off with this wonderful publication. It's called Roman Byzantium. It's written by David Sear. Now, when we were doing this on Tuesday evening, I got a guy there who's very much into his Romans, and he said, "Oh wow, I want to get hold of a copy of that." He said, "Oh, I could get hold of a copy if it was if I had 250 quid." And I just thought, "Oh my God, this is wonderful!" And then Michelle came up behind me with a knife. Obviously thinking this was more valuable than me. Anyway, the wonderful thing about this publication is it helps us go into the ideas of the mindset of Caligula himself. It's it basically all 121 Roman emperors and all the Byzantine emperors, all their family links and all the rest of it, indications of what some of their coins look like is brilliant. And this is really helpful for me today to try and sort of set the scene. You can't get this out on the internet. You can't do any of that. So this is why books are so useful. So we start off with the first Roman emperor, Augustus. And he became emperor in the year 27 years BC after defeating Antony and Cleopatra. He was the first emperor. Then after him, you've got Tiberius. Both Augustus and Tiberius lived a happy life. Augustus lived to the age of 75, died of natural causes, and Tiberius, 78, died of natural causes. Then you come on to Caligula, assassinated by his bodyguard at the age of 28. So you can see that there's something not quite right there already. And then Caligula is the third emperor, and the fourth emperor is Claudius. He was assassinated. Nero, the fifth emperor, committed suicide. The sixth emperor murdered. The seventh emperor assassinated. Otho, the eighth emperor, suicide. Vitellius killed by the mob. So you know, and then obviously Vespasian, natural causes and things start to get a bit normal again. So what does that tell us? It doesn't tell us much. But when we get to the reign of Caligula, if we see into his background, we can get an idea of the man himself. His father was called Germanicus, and if you look at any coins from Caligula, and we're going to look at a coin from Caligula now as we screen share. It would help if I got my images up on the screen first. So if you could bear with me a second, I'm going to get my images up, and we're going to screen share an image of one of Caligula's coins. So just get this ready now, and here is a coin of Caligula. Come on, is it coming? Yeah, it should be coming up now. We're going to share screens, and I did have it actually there a second ago. Hang on, it's a bit slow. Oh, there you go, bingo. Hang on. Right, so are we sharing? Hang on, just technical glitch a minute. Right, share screens, go with the flow, go. Should work. Come on. No, it's my fault.
No.
Oh, shh.
Oh, hang on.
It's coming. Oh, here we go. Here's a coin of Caligula now.
Oh, right.
Oh no!
Very nice.
That's not a coin of Caligula. Sorry, that's Dennis from Lantrit Major. And as somebody asked today, is that his wife? Right. So let's get one of his coins. Come on, it's up. It's coming. There. Right. We can see. So we got the coin there. So first things first. Talking about his father. Now this is a coin of Caligula. but Caligula's name is not on that coin. It's Caesar Augustus Germanicus. And actually, Caligula's official name was Germanicus after his father, because his father was called Germanicus as well. His father was called Germanicus Caesar, and had been a nephew of Tiberius. Now, painting the scene, his father was of imperial blood. His father was a military general, and Caligula had gone into battle with his father, Germanicus, and he'd gone into battle with his father, Germanicus, as his father led the Roman legions. And his son, Caligula, was only 3 years old, and he was dressed in a little miniature Roman uniform with helmet and skirt and metalwork and a little miniature gladius. And the soldiers were so taken by Caligula that they called him Little Boot. And that's what Caligula means. So Caligula, as he would be later known, and his father Germanicus had a very firm and fond relationship. However, that wasn't to be for long, because at the age of 7, Germanicus died of natural causes. And obviously the trauma that caused for Caligula is something that Caligula's never able to get over with. Not so long, a few years later, as Caligula's developing as a man himself with his own identity, and his mother, Agrippina Senior, is a very influential power in Caligula's life, and we know that because he was very much in love with his 3 sisters. Unfortunately, in AD 33, Caligula's mother, Agrippina Senior, died. So again, we've got another trauma. At the age of 21, he's not only lost his father, he's lost his mother. 3 years earlier, he loses his brother Nero. He also loses in the same year as his mother, his other brother Brutus. So that means that he's lost his 2 mothers, his 2 brothers, his mother and his father. And then we go on, all that's left is his 3 sisters. And this is where this coin comes in. The first year of Caligula's reign, he dedicates a coin to his 3 sisters, who he loves very dearly. And this coin, on the obverse, the piece with the head is known as the obverse, and the reverse, that's the reverse. On his coins, the title Caesar Augustus Germanicus, and various other wordings after that. Caesar is basically the title that is offered as a memory to the great leader Julius Caesar. Augustus is the name of the first Roman emperor, and Germanicus is the title that Caligula was officially given. And on the back of the coin, his 3 sisters, Agrippina Jr., Drusilla, and Julia. Alas, Drusilla and Julia died before the end of Caligula's reign in AD 41, leaving Agrippina Jr. And Agrippina Jr., if anyone knows anything about their history, is the 4th wife of Claudius, and believed that Agrippina had killed Claudius in revenge for the death of her son Caligula, because Claudius was the uncle of Caligula. And also, Claudius and Agrippina Jr. had several children, including several actually outlived the reign. But there's another person who comes into this, Nero. And Nero was in fact the stepson of Claudius, a nephew of Caligula. So we get the family tree in there, and that paints the scene. That builds up who Caligula is as a character. And one thing, Caligula is very much derided in history. He's very much misunderstood. and surprisingly enough, his achievements are many. And he reigns for no more than 4 years. He reigns for 3 years and 10 months and 8 days. So he's got a very short reign, but his achievements are many. He commissions 2 aqueducts to be built leading into Rome. He has a number of roads constructed, various palaces constructed, including 2 at Rome itself, one on the Palatine Hill, a massive fortress at Calais. And what's that for? If some of you already might know, an invasion of Britain that probably took place, but it's been missed in the history. And also something that we're going to spend most of the time looking at today, the 3 boats at Lake Nemi. Not the 2 boats, but the 3 boats. So again, looking at these coins, you have 2 figureheads on 2 separate coins, a denarius from his reign. Again, both of them show portraits of Caligula. He's always seen with short cropped hair, but he's not seen with a crown or laurel wreaths. And that's a rather interesting thing. Did you know that in Caligula's reign, he brought back the ability for people to vote? Democracy was restored. Hang on a minute, he was a despot. So in other words, you can smell a fish, and you can see a fish floating in the horizon. There's something not quite right. The 2 historians who write about Caligula, a certain Suetonius, who's writing approximately the year 100 years AD, and another writer known as Cassius Dio, who's writing 200 years AD, respectively, 60 years after Caligula's dead, and 160 years after Caligula's dead. Both of them are not writing about the time. So what they saying, was that correct or not? And that's an interesting thing. This is an individual that, if you wish to go back in time, may have been somebody who was a very gentle emperor. If you read the histories, you see him as an absolute despot. And some historians very much doubt what the official histories tell us. And there's one, I don't know if we remember a few weeks ago, we looked at the reign of Caracalla. And in the reign of Caracalla, now Caracalla's, so if I'll chuck in a few dates, I haven't given you these. Caligula reigned from 37 AD to 41 AD. Right, let's go to Caracalla. Caracalla's brother Geta, if you can remember, in Caracalla's reign, roughly on the death of his father in 211, Septimus Severus, to 217, he had the name of his own brother Geta erased from history. Geta had what's known as damnatio memoriae placed against him. Everything to do with Geta was to be erased. Any statues destroyed, coins were melted down. You couldn't even mention Geta's name. You could be burnt at the stake for mentioning Geta's name if you were a friend of Geta or anything, right? That's what the Romans did if they wanted to discredit a figure in history. Caligula, even though we see him written about later on as being discredited, for the Romans, he was respected. He may have been assassinated, but then again, lots of Roman emperors are assassinated, right? Doesn't mean to say that they weren't respected. But then we've got to believe the history later on. And the history tells us those terrible things about him. One thing that you will see about Caligula is in great contrast to many emperors. You can actually still find coins of Geta, the Roman emperor whose memory were erased in the reign of Caracalla. And the thing being said there, if you look in a coin, a coin catalog, looking for coins to purchase from Caligula, you can't find them because they're so sought after. Caligula is immortalized against the history. And there's a figure today that is very similar to the way people saw Caligula. And the best example is Michael Jackson. I don't believe anything that they said about Michael Jackson is true, i.e. the terrible things. Other people believe it. But you still hear Michael Jackson's music being played and all the rest of it. But some of the people writing about Michael Jackson say terrible things about him, but he's still immortalized. People love Michael Jackson. His music's still being played. They love him. And there's a parallel with Caligula. This is a statue that was seized, leaving Italy not so many years ago. This is actually part of a statue of Caligula. And this was going to go into a private collection of a collector who wanted some connection to do with Caligula. Despot or respected figure? We're not going to get the answer to that. Now, this is an individual who inherited an empire this big. This is an empire not at its height yet, but not far off. By the end of the reign of Trajan, actually that's wrong. By the end of the reign of Hadrian, around the 130s, the empire expanded into Britain, a little bit more into Africa, has gone into Romania, bit more into Germania, and that's it. That's as far as it's going to expand. This was the empire in the year AD 40, in the height of his very short reign. And he, as a despot, he held onto this empire. So what does that tell you? The other thing as well is maybe around early 41 AD, probably later on in AD 40, maybe Britain could be colored red. The problem is, when we originally did this lecture on Tuesday, we spent a lot of time on other things to do with Caligula, i.e. the invasion of Britain. And the lecture started at 7:30. We didn't finish until 20 past 10. And I don't intend to go on for nearly 3 hours today. So the British stuff,
please no.
The British stuff I need to do really quickly, right? Suetonius Cassius Dio said that the invasion of Britain was basically made up by Caligula. I believe that there was an invasion of Britain. Over by here, there's Calais. You can see the cursor. There's Calais over by there. Now, I believe that the fortress had been constructed at Calais to house the Roman legions required to invade Britain. That's one fact. It was commissioned by Caligula, right? Why would somebody do that if they weren't going to invade, right? That's one issue. Suetonius and I was going to say Suetonius Paulinus, that's somebody completely different. Suetonius in around 100 AD, and Cassius Dio in the year roughly about 200 years AD. Sort of conflicting reports about what happened. One of them argues that Suetonius said that he brought the Roman legions to the coastline, and he said to the Roman legions, fill your hats up with shells, which happened to be mussels, put them on carts. These were sent to Rome, and the senators would see the fact that Caligula invaded Britain because a load of shells had been collected, when in fact Caligula hadn't invaded at all. That's what Suetonius tells us. Dio Cassius tells us that in fact Caligula was ready to invade Britain, but the legionaries refused to do so because they were so superstitious about going on the sea. And Caligula was in such a rage, he said to all the legionaries, go onto the beach, fill your helmets with shells, to just basically to show a complete disrespect for the legionaries as they had shown to him. That's what Cassius Dio is saying. There's other historians saying that even though the Roman legionaries didn't follow Caligula, he managed to get to the coastline of Britain, somewhere like Pegwell Bay, where Julius Caesar had landed, met a native leader called Adminius, And the local leader, Adminius, basically said to Caligula, my great Caligula, I am not going to fight you. I will give Britain to you. You are now our leader, right? Caligula goes back and says, I have now conquered Britain. The leaderies say, hang on a minute, you've just only been over there and come back, right? And exactly, that's very similar to what happened to Julius Caesar. In fact, Caligula didn't have to lose a single soldier. The one point of all this is, before we go on to the thing about the boats, is that Claudius had such an easy time invading Britain because it's very likely that Caligula had already received tribute from Adminius a couple of years earlier. So by the time AD 43 comes in, Claudius has a fairly easy time of conquering the south of England. All three of them are theories, but I feel that mine's got a little bit more credence. In effect, why would Suetonius and Dio Cassius write good things about Caligula, and when they had nothing but bad things to say about him? Why would they say he would have invaded Britain? So there's that side of things out of the way. So what I'd like to do now is go very much into the text, go very much into where I want to be, and you are looking into a wonderful landscape. So to get an idea where this is known as Lake Diana, right? Diana's temple, Diana's mirror. This is Lake Nemi. And to show you exactly where this is, I'm going to stop the screen sharing. I'm going to take you to here. Are you able to see this map, or do I need? No, you're not seeing this map, so don't worry. I know what I've done wrong. So if we screen share now, and we've got a map, bingo. Can you see that?
No,
Not yet.
not yet.
Ah,
That's
yes.
it.
Yes.
Yes.
Now that is Rome there. You can tell it's Rome because it's got the words municipio, and the word Roma. So there you go. This Lake Nemi itself is basically a suburban district of Rome. Is so close to Rome that it plays an important role in the Second World War. That plays an important role in the fate of these two boats. I'm gonna put a little red herring in there. What happened to the lead from the two boats after 1944? Anyway, I just put that in there. Infected your mind with a little fact there. This is
Maybe
where we
into
are, so it's
hundreds.
very close to Rome. So what we're going to do now, we're going to stop the screen sharing and we're going to go off again. And we're going to try to find my images again. Oh God, my images have disappeared a second. So if we go there, good, go. And I want my images, please. Please, 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 please. Hang on. There it is. Are you seeing the image again?
No.
Not yet. Yes.
Yes.
Right, okay. So here we go. I don't know if any of you know about the archaeologist, Egyptologist John Romer. No?
Yes.
Ever heard
Yes.
of him? Well, that's my Bible, isn't it, Anne? So
Yeah.
John Romer was one of these archaeologists, a very good archaeologist. He's still alive. He lives in Sicily. He's about 80 now. He had several series on television. He was very much the archaeological expert on TV in the 1980s, and then he did a wonderful series on television called Great Excavations. He also came up with a publication called Great Excavation: John Romer's History of Archaeology, a wonderful history which I've taught from many times. And in a sector in his book, he's got the title "The Boats of Nemi," 1927 to 1944. And then it says the ashes of the past. So you can work out what comes next. But before we actually go into any more images, we've got to paint the picture. We've got to paint of the times. This is a time of Mussolini's Italy. This is a time that somebody like me working in Italy would. Can you all bear with me a minute? I've just got to knock on the door. Hang on. Stay there.
No. No, we can't bear with you. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Can we all hear each other?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, we can talk now. Talk about him behind his back. Yeah, despot.
Well, Carl.
Yeah, you shouldn't be answering the door.
Sorry about that, folks. That's the problem teaching from home. You have people knocking your door.
I've found you now to see you.
Okay, then.
You can move the pictures up and down.
Right, here we go.
Who was
Right,
it, Carl?
right, here we go. No, don't worry. It was somebody checking on us. That was all. So, so the boats of Nemi. So this most extraordinary lake south of Rome.
You said Diana. You said Diane, Lake Diane.
It's Lake Nemi. Right, whoever's talking, can you please be quiet?
Sorry.
Right, good. It's also called Lake Nemi. It's Diana's lake.
Oh,
It's the
the
same
same
lake.
lake.
Shh. Right. This lake itself is in the heartland of ancient Latin Rome. And yeah, sorry, I've just been thrown by the door. And we're looking inside a caldera. We're looking inside an extinct volcano full of water. And it's a landscape filled with mystery. It's a landscape filled with stories, myths and legends. And it's a landscape that's been written about well before the day of Caligula. In the day of Virgil, who's writing about 60 to 70 years before Caligula, he writes of a vast temple associated with Diana by the lakeside. Virgil also tells us of enlivened, lurid tales which involve ritual, which involve murder, which involve buried treasure. It also involves the sense of the sinister rite, the sacred golden trees, in Coleridge's in Xanadu did Kubla Khan, a stately, in Coleridge's in Xanadu did Kubla Khan, a stately pleasure dome decree where Alf, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. And this is a type of landscape that Coleridge is writing about. The myths and legends on the Grand Tour. But back in the days of the Grand Tour, nobody knew about these two large vessels or three large vessels underneath Diana's mirror. They had been written about in the past, but anyone visiting this landscape basically wouldn't have known they were there. There was rumors out there that there was something underneath the water. There was also a landscape where escaping slaves may have gone to kill the odd high priest. It's also the landscape that is the backdrop of the revolt of Spartacus, which would be around 78 BC. It's a landscape which is even today half forgotten in myths and legends. It's a landscape which creates a backdrop where Mussolini is examining the landscape for some of those great treasures that will one day make Italy great again. I'm a great fan of Mussolini, and as I was just saying before, the door was, somebody knocked the door. I'm a great fan of Mussolini because if I was in Italy in the 1930s, I would have been paid very handsomely to be an archaeologist. I'd have a house with servants. I'd have a house provided by the state. I'd have all the resources. And yes, The archaeologists had all the resources to examine this lake. The archaeologists had all the resources to examine Rome. The archaeologists had all the resources to examine Sicily. A lot of money was placed into new excavations at Herculaneum and Pompeii. And when we think about this backdrop, the archaeology was to be the saving of the state. If we look at Hitler's Germany a few years after the discovery of these vessels in 1927, Italy wished to use its past to enliven its future. Germany wished to say, look, you know, we've got every right to be Germans. You know, the Anna Nerbe, the German archaeologists, were trying to find the real origins for the German Reich that they were saying was so wonderful. But the difference here is that Italy didn't need to prove anything. It had all these monuments. It had these great mysteries. And all that Mussolini needed to do was to excavate them. He was to make bare the Colosseum so everybody could see it. He was to make bare the family mausoleum of Hadrian. He was to make bare the Augustan water fountain that was found in the heart of Rome by Mussolini's archaeologists. Truly, this was the next place to go to. And in 1927, it was the turn of this wonderful backdrop. Those two buildings there are the two hangar-like buildings that were constructed to house two large boats, barges, ships, or however you'd like to refer them as galleys. And they were housed in there until they were sadly lost in 1944. Moving on a bit more. Again, Caligula was the one responsible for commanding the construction of the House of Caligula at the Palatine Hill in Rome itself. And the thing is, if the likes of Caligula were so derided, why wasn't that building pulled down? He was very much respected. So only the historians tell us these things. I've just lost my image a minute. So this was also constructed for and under the command of Caligula. And there he is himself. Very much portrayed. Down through the ages, many people had caught glimpses of two near-legendary boats, two enormous barges in the mud of the lake. But they were 14 meters down. They used all sorts of technology to dive down to them. It's said that an early contraption as a water diving helmet was invented in the 1500s, and somebody actually went down there to actually see what they could find. They actually used a diving bell to actually try to recover objects from these barges in 1827. We've got all the notes to do with that. Over the years, fishermen's nets would be snagged on the decking and the boat's bronze fittings that were under the surface. These were some of the finest and heaviest fittings ever made. The odd statues occasionally dredged up, ritual equipment, even the likes of copper roof tiles, all these things being brought up from the watery, the deadly grave that was these enormous barges. But with this, it's thought that the barges never survived. Lots of historians were saying, look, the barges never survived, because there was a note, there was a reference made that the senators ordered the barges to be deconstructed and then all that stuff recycled and so on. So why was it the copper roof tiles were still being dredged up? Surely if the vessels were being used for salvage, those copper roof tiles would be the first things to go. Why is it when Mussolini's archaeologists were excavating in the 1920s and revealing the first barge in 1931, why was it that there was so many of these brass and bronze fittings still there? There is quite likely that the Senate never ever salvaged anything from the two barges at all. And I've mentioned in two barges. Up until 1944, there was thought that there were two barges, but now archaeologists have found a third one. And thank goodness this was not found in 1927, because we'd have lost that as well. Going back to our wonderful publication here. But before we do that, let's get another little image. Now, this is the first of those barges. Look at it. It's wonderful, isn't it? Now, we've really reconstructed and deconstructed this vessel. You make mistakes and you sort of reassess things when you do the lectures. For example, on Tuesday, I'd made a corker of a mistake. And in one of the images we're going to come up with, and I'll tell you which one it was. And they said, actually, you've got this wrong. And I thought, okay, that's brilliant. And actually really added to the lecture. And when you're examining these things, you've got different voices saying different things, and it's great. One of the things I will say initially is that this vessel didn't have one keel in the middle, didn't have 3 keels, had 5 keels altogether. It was a flat bottom barge, a flat bottom galley type structure. And if you look here, these were actually for the oarsmen. This is one section that survived. A bit of this has survived over here. From port to starboard, it was 20 meters wide. With this added, it was a little bit wider. From stern to aft, this vessel itself was in fact 70 meters in length. So proud to have, it was 70 meters in length. So this gives you the magnitudes of these vessels, absolutely huge. We've discussed extensively how these were built. One of the things we've really discussed is that when they were originally being built, they probably deliberately drained Lake Nemi to create some kind of dry dock. So they built it. This was lead lined. It was thousands of tons in weight. The displacement was thousands of tons in weight, because they added a temple on it. They added trees that were made of bronze. There was even a swimming pool on some of these. The vast weight, and it's likely that after the timbers and everything had been put in place, they lined the hull with 3 layers of lead, and then they allowed the water to lap around this vessel, and the vessel was gradually raised. It was placed further out into the lake, and then they built the temple on top of it. The temple wasn't built out of timber, right? They were actually built out of marble. That's the type of weight we're talking about this vessel. It was extremely heavy indeed. But these lasted, all 3 of them lasted for some time. Some say the vessels themselves weren't actually commissioned to be constructed by Caligula at all. Some actually believe they had been constructed in an earlier reign. But Caligula was blamed for the opulence of building these. But it also showed you Roman engineering. It also showed you that the Romans could drain a lake like this. It showed you their capability of constructing something like this. And this is a true marvel. And what Mussolini was trying to say, that by showing their wonders to the world, Mussolini was to create the new Italian empire, obviously with invasions of Libya, with invasions of the likes of Ethiopia and Albania and some of the Greek islands. This was to be the new Italian empire. And in many ways, the Italians have been very much derided. It could be said that this was a good thing, very much a good thing. It was unifying people throughout Italy, very much to do with what Hitler was doing with the autobahns and so on in Germany in the 1930s. They wanted to give people work. Italy was doing the same thing. They wanted to sort of show that they could do things. Whilst there's a massive recession in America and Great Britain, the Italians are investing state money into these things. And they're actually showing off what Italy's capable of doing. But this is the Italian mindset. They've always done this. Because in 1911, there was talk of these barges. They knew they were there from the diving there in 1827, from earlier references in the 1400s, from the documents that have survived from the Senate and so on. In 1911, they constructed a huge structure like this as part of the international exhibition in Rome in 1911. They built one of these things, and on it they did wonderful things. So the Italians were doing this in 1911. They were certainly capable of doing this in the reign and before the reign of Caligula as well. So what we do know is these complex barges would have been floated out into the lake, and there would have been a number of oarsmen to sort of position it out into the lake. It was a vessel with 4 rudders, 2 on the prow, 2 on the aft, and 2 on the stern. There was 4 rudders altogether, and it was proportionately, these were the super tankers of the day. Very, very heavy, very, very broad. And some descriptions, some of the evidence that we've actually found on them, marbles, when they've been salvaging them, they were marble columns on there. We know that, not from the descriptions, but from what we found on there. Bronze life-size palm trees. Bronze life-size palm trees. Can you imagine the weight of a single bronze life-size palm tree? And all the lead. This was actually constructed not out of oak but out of cedar wood, the very best cedar wood. On the engravings on the pipes that they raised, tells you that the vessel had probably been commissioned by maybe Tiberius. But then again, they were fully in use in the reign of Caligula. To actually keep these vessels from sort of filling up with water because of the overburden, they would have had to have used bilge pumps every single day. So when a bilge is actually building up in the hull, they've got to get rid of that excess water every single day, because the overburden was probably heavier than the vessel itself, and would have meant that if you didn't get rid of the bilge of water, because these were low lying on the lake, those vessels would have simply sunk. So with a sense of these grandiose gardens, the arcades and all the rest of it, Mussolini wanted to have these excavated, displayed intact. So back in the day, back in the 1920s, 1927, the Roman engineer Corrado Ricci, under the direction of the archaeologist Giuseppe Moretti, came up with an intriguing way of raising these vessels. You wouldn't raise them at all. You just drain Lake Nemi itself. And what they found was that there was a Roman water system that had showed that the lake in time had probably been drained to construct these vessels. So what Corrado Ricci was saying, he said, right, what we need is 4 vast electric water pumps to drain Lake Nemi. And they used Roman water systems to do it as well. So they bit of Roman craftsmanship with the new electric water pumps, and they drained 1.4 billion cubic feet of water from the lake over a period of 3 years, which was quite an extraordinary feat. And then when they had removed the vessels to the hangars, or they had the hangars built around them, one or the other, the vessels themselves were then protected, and then the water allowed to fill the lake in again. So this was great Italian engineering. And to be honest with you, you always hear those jokes about the Italians. You always hear, i.e., the Italians only had 1 gear on their tank, and that was reverse. And the Italians didn't have any war heroes of the Second World War. Well, I've done a lot of research into this. And if it wasn't for the Italians at the Battle of El Alamein, Rommel's army would have not got away. And I was reading today that 3 Italian tanks knocked out 120 British tanks trying to trap Rommel at El Alamein. And just one thing, it doesn't paint the Italians as cowards. It paints them as being quite good with a lot of things. But over history, people have derided the Italians quite a lot, and it's unfair to do so. Carrying on. So we're looking at this, and the other thing as well is to actually move the vessel. They actually moved it on rails. You've all heard the jokes about Italians. The one thing that Italians managed to do was to actually make their trains run on time. They also managed to move these 70-meter long barges on rails into the safety of these buildings. Amazing, amazing that. And then, interestingly enough, the vessels were intact. They were able to move them. And there's lots of talk that the Italians used technology that the Norwegians and the Danish had devised, because the Norwegians and the Danish, when you look at the likes of the Vasa, which was a vessel dating to 1628, when the Vasa was recovered, practically intact, the Norwegians had devised a way of preserving the vessel. The Italians said to the Norwegians, look, this is new for us. Come over and help us. We've got the engineers to do this. Just come on over and help us. And they perfectly preserved these vessels. They were able to do it. And that's the amazing thing about this. Amazing. Got one of the dates wrong. The first vessel, the one of two, was first brought to light in 1929 and the second one in 1931. So again, looking at more of these images. Again, I love this. I love this image, and the reason why I love this image is because it shows queues of Italians, and they're all lined up. They're all queuing to look at the vessel, and there's men, women, and children there, and there's this woman looking back at the camera there, and there's a little child there, and these are all Italians looking at this, looking at what their money is being used for. And are they angry? No, they're quite proud. This is, remember, the Italians are they're very proud nation. The Italians were on the winning side in the First World War. They had defeated they had defeated the Austrians. They had held out well against the Germans. The Italians were the victors of the First World War. The Italians were the only victors of the First World War. I got to be honest with you. And they're very proud people. This is why they're allowing their money to be used in this level of excavation. And don't shout out and say, well, they had no choice. Well, to be honest with you, millions of Italians were in on this, right? And there was thousands of Italians involved within the archaeology. So, you know, they must have actually agreed with it somewhere along the line. And these are people visiting. They didn't sort of bust people down there to say, come and visit this vessel for a photograph. They're seeing this and they're enjoying this. And they're understanding this. And again, back to this guy here, Caligula, a bust of Caligula. A wonderful, tender bust of Caligula. He's not, and now, if this is a despot, right? Can you see a crown on his head? Nope. Can you see laurel wreaths on his head? Nope. In other words, he's shown as somebody who's human. He's not shown as a god. And this is a very, very interesting point. Very, very interesting point. Got some important facts to give you after the break, actually. Now, here we go. This is one of the vessels in a purpose-built aircraft hangar, right? One thing is that the Italian state were able to fund the construction of a 40-meter span aircraft hangar made out of cast concrete. And these two buildings still stand today. And they're still used today. But sadly, none of the boats exist anymore. The only boat that does exist was the one that wasn't excavated. That's over recent years being located, Lake Nemi itself. Now, what you can see being held up there, what you can see is actually the lead hull, 3 layers of lead. And what you can actually see at the bottom here is one of the rails. That's actually one of the rails that they used to sort of push this into or drag this into whatever they did. Obviously, a little bit by bit, they managed to get it within this building, away from the later to be flooded lakeside. Now, one thing to remember when I do the end bit, so I'm not going to do the end bit now, is if you look at the hull itself, that's cladded with lead. Now, in a report that was written by the Roman authorities after the war was over, they said that the only thing that survived of the Nemi boats was a couple of bits of charred timber. And then I thought about this. I've always thought about this. And I've always thought there's something missing. And then I suddenly realized, does lead evaporate? And then I suddenly realized, no. And then I realized something else. If you're going to burn this vessel, the lead and the timber, as the lead melts, the carbonized wood is going to fall into the lead. And some unburnt timber is going to fall into the lead. And because it's now liquid lead, it's going to stop the oxygen burning the timber anymore. And therefore, the timbers would have survived. Some of them would have survived, or lots of them. Very few of the timbers survived, and none of the lead survived. So that means the vessels were deliberately set alight after the lead had been removed. I'd never seen, you know, when you do lectures like this, you actually, you actually see things that are wrong. To be honest with you, we saw everything that was wrong with the St. Bees lecture straight away, to be honest with you. It was just too obvious, but there were some obvious things with this. Even John Romer doesn't expand on that. It doesn't expand. So what we're going to do, we're going to look into a few more images. But one thing I want to say is this: the ancient Roman water system was designed to keep the water by Diana's temple at a constant height, and that was important so the temple of Diana wasn't flooded. And it was also important for the boats, and you know, to get stability within the lake. And obviously it was important for the boats to be constructed in the first place. But moving on a bit more. Now, awe and amazement with some of the artifacts that have been found. Now, I decided wisely not to show you too many of the artifacts found that have been recovered from the vessels over the years. And the reason why is because there's so many on the internet, we would be here until 5 o'clock. So, but you can look these images up yourself. So what you need to do, you need to type in Lake Nemi, or you need to write in Diana's barges on Lake Nemi, artifacts. You need to put artifacts after it. You come up with hundreds of artifacts that have been found there, hundreds. So that nothing was ever salvaged off this by the Roman Senate. It went down. And the other thing as well is, this is an important point, very important point to be made now. If the Senate had taken, all the good stuff off, right, the vessels would have never have sunk. Why do I say that? Right, okay, so you've got the timber and you've got the lead, right? And the water itself, without the overburden on it, would have been lighter than the timber. So in other words, the timber would have remained floating, right? Now with the overburden above, that would have been heavier than the substructure, i.e. the hull and the timber and all the rest of it. Meaning that that would have meant that if you didn't use the bilge pumps on a regular basis on the barges, they would have instantly sunk, right? So that meant that the vessels sunk because the bilge pumps weren't maintained to keep the water off the vessel, meaning that material was not recovered from the vessels, meaning that's why we've got such a good state of preservation. Because you can imagine if these vessels would have been floating around Lake Nemi with all the overburden and everything taken off it by the Senate, right? They would have simply been, the material would have simply been scrapped, the lead taken off, and we'd never have found them. So you can only examine these facts rather from the fiction if you really get an idea of what's there. Now look at this again. Look at these hands. Now I absolutely love. Oh, we won't do that in a second. I absolutely love Roman metalwork. So we've got some really nice. We've got some really nice bronzes here, and we've got what you see there. If we look on the left-hand side, can you see the shadow created? The little bit of a shadow. These are not sort of, these are not, this isn't the lost wax method, i.e. somebody put their hand in sand and said, right, just pour in that and that'll be fine, right? This is technologically advanced. In the Roman period, their bronzes and their brass work was phenomenal. Absolutely some of the best ever created. And this is what we're seeing here as well. Again, some of these recovered. There's one point I'd like to make, that when we go into the period of the 1740s, late 1740s, the kings and queens of Naples are actually robbing the archaeology from Pompeii and Herculaneum. And the point to be made there is when they're taking the archaeology, like the bronzes and the brass and the silver work and the gold and all the rest of it, melting down, making coins and so on. There's no reason why they didn't send, there's no reason why they couldn't have sent people to recover one or two bits and pieces from these barges. So if you culminate over from the 1400s all the way to 1895, the amount of material must have been nicked from these vessels. It's still quite phenomenal what was there in 1927 when they recovered them. And again, back to the other point, that what we're looking at is Caligula. We're looking at Caligula in history. They've constantly reportrayed him. This is not somebody that they not wanted to portray. This isn't somebody who isn't a hero. This is somebody that they're continually showing off. This is our Caligula. Look what Caligula did. Hang on, the historians tell us he was a despot. So why are you glorifying him? There's something very odd about what the historians say about Caligula and who he actually was. He's quite proud there on his favorite horse. It's said by the historians later that to deride the Senate, he decided to put one of his favorite horse up for office. But before his horse could be accepted in the Senate, Caligula had been assassinated. How much of that is true or not, I don't know. But I would doubt it. But now what we're going to do, we're going to look at this after the break. Are there any questions?
No.
Not fine.
Did you didn't you say that they were destroyed in the war? Weren't they bombed?
Yes, they were.
But the hangars are still there.
The hangars are still there, yeah. And you've just smelt the red herring.
Yeah, they weren't sure though, were they, whether it was the Germans or Italians or Americans who did it?
Anne, you've just made a wonderful point for the first time ever, right?
Oh,
These are cast concrete hangars, right? When you destabilize a cast concrete structure, it's very difficult to restore it. right? You know, if you look at some of the, if you go to the stock buildings on Jersey, where they're where you've got the underground hospital in the center of Germany,
Yeah.
in the center of Jersey, you see the damage caused to those buildings, and you see that you can't really repair them, right?
No.
These aircraft handbags look immaculate, and you start seeing a keen red herring, and there's been no real story about this, but I'm sure if I went to Italy, not now, but if I went to Italy next year and knocked on people's doors and say, can somebody remember what happened to those buildings, I would get the truth.
Oh, right.
I'm sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Anyone got any other questions?
No.
Fine. No.
Right. Okay. So we're going to have a 10-minute break. Anne can talk to Henry about a new washing machine.
Oh, actually, I found out how to keep it going.
Use electricity?
No, it's I've got to turn the I've got to get hold of the get hold of
In other
the
words, you've got to turn it on.
lead and pull it over the top of the washing machine and put a bag of rice on it or a bag of flour so it stays in position, and then it just keeps going.
It sounds as though you got a loose wire.
I've got a loose wire, yeah. I mean, really, I think it could be taken, you know, it could be looked at really, like by an electrician. But but we're using the bag of rice.
I'd unscrew the plug and actually have a look to see if any of the cables are loose and tighten them up.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that it seems to be coming from the plug, from the cable coming out of the washing machine at the back. That's where it seems to be loose. Any connection, you know, but I think Joe's looked at the plugs.
Do you earth yourself when you load the washing machine?
Oh no. I mean, I will be careful. Wear rubber gloves.
Yeah, wear rubber gloves.
Wear rubber gloves.
Oh God, I can't handle
And
it.
I got
Right.
rubber shoes.
I'm going to go for a walk.
Can you go for a walk, Del? No, Henry, can you go for a walk?
Yeah, I've been down
No,
on
I'm
the
popping
cliffs.
for a comfort break now.
You're having a comfort break, yeah.
Next.
Oh.
Yeah, we're allowed out and about. There's very few people here anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I can go. I just haven't been out for a week now. Although I did go around the block the other day before I got my letter. So it says I've got to stay in, and you know,
Wait for
have
the
my
food
own
parcel.
bedroom. Have my own bedroom. Well, I've got my own bedroom anyway. But.
Right, Anne wanted me to ask
Right.
if you can all join the Archaeology Cymru Facebook page.
Oh yeah, I mean.
So what I'm going to do,
Well,
I'm going to send an invite for you all to join, and that's what we're going to do.
No, I'm not joining Facebook. Definitely not.
All right, I won't add you then.
No, honestly,
No, I'm not. Don't mean to do Facebook.
and you know, nobody uses Facebook on our classes
But did everybody read the notes from last
Notepads.
week?
except me.
Did everybody read the notes from last week?
I did join a
Yes.
Facebook group once, but it kind of collapsed, and that was cut very private because it kept it within the family. But I'm very reluctant to do Twitter, Facebook, anything like that.
Yeah, It's okay. I mean, I've actually, you don't know this guy, but he used to be in our group, and he's now in Stuttgart. Is it Stuttgart?
Yes.
Stuttgart. And he comes on, our Bridgend archaeology site, and so he, it's like a little bit of home for him, and there's somebody who was born in this area, but he lives in Cardiff. So yeah, I'm getting like a few people that can relate to Bridgend, coming onto our site. So but I only show pictures. I mean, I just put any archaeology kind of things that come to me, and
because Henry, I'm speaking for Henry, right?
It's gone now.
Oh, it's a shame. I was gonna say that Henry sent me a message asking if you could put a photograph of your washing machine on there.
I will.
Washing machine, yeah.
Well, we need a new one really, but we're trying to delay it, delay buying a new one. Because sometimes it just works.
I just had a message off Vodafone. It says be wary of coronavirus on the internet.
Oh.
But there.
What does it do?
No, apparently 8 million people reported that they may have caught coronavirus from the internet.
Oh God. I was thinking that the other day. I was thinking, it might be like a metaphor,
But and what about this, right? I haven't read this, right, but somebody sent me a joke. It goes, Bob saw his doctor and asked if he had ever laughed at a patient. He says, in over 20 years, I haven't, because I tried to remain professional. With that, Bob dropped his trousers, revealing the tiniest, really, and the doctor had ever seen. It wasn't any bigger than an AA battery. The doctor burst into uncontrollable hysteria. I'm sorry, I really am. I don't know what came over me. I promise it won't happen again. Now, what seems to be the problem? It's swollen, said Bob. I don't think I should read anything out from my phone again. Right, I gotta go get a drink.
Oh, right, okay. Why is this going on for a break?
We're supposed to be having a break, yeah.
Oh,
On,
my husband's waiting to come in and watch the telly.
I'm going to get a drink of water.
I might have to go to another room. going to move you. I'm going to move my computer.
Going to move what? Oh.
Those balls. There you go. Here you go. Oh, hang on. There you go.
Oh.
Yeah, tell you what.
Right. Oh, I'm dark now.
I'll tell you what, you use them at first. Right. Use them at first, and then I'll empty the other ones in there, okay? Right. Jim! My name is Jim! Yeah, don't give it to him.
Oh, how long have you been in the group, Anne?
Pardon?
How long have you been in the group?
Not very long.
My name is Jim!
I don't know if it's archaeology. I'm very interested.
I'm gonna have some crisps, and then we're gonna get started.
Oh, I was just talking to Anne. Do you have to be rude?
Henri, Anne said that she's gonna put a photograph of the washing machine on the website.
Oh, he never lets us get a word in edgeways, honestly.
Go on, you two talk. Go on, have a woman's talk. Go on.
No, it's all right. I was just asking Anne how long she's been in the group.
Well, no, not very long. I mean, I don't know. I know so little about archaeology, but I am finding it very interesting. And
Oh, good.
no, as I say, I hated history at school because it was all about kings and battles. But archaeology is about. I've always been interested in the history of technology, and I think and I think archaeology brings that to you. It shows you the kind of tools they had and the kind of thing at different parts of history, the kind of things they had at their disposal. And when you think how all our comforts of life really are what people have found, I think it's
well done.
Yeah, I didn't. My children all watched the archaeology, you know, things like time signs and not time sign, time team and Christopher. Oh, I can't think of his name now. You know, the archaeology programs, and I used to just sort of look at it in the background, you know, but when I went to Carl's class, it was just another area of life that I didn't know anything about, really.
Oh my God, Dell's there again. I like Dell. I like Dell.
Especially the history, you know, when you realise it's quite a modern.
Dell, I was going to have a word with you, right?
You know.
Are you there, Dell?
I am.
Right, do you want to? Are you interested in my ghostly evenings on a Saturday?
Yes, is it the one you're doing with Ogmore Castle?
We did Ogmore Castle last week. This week we're doing my steg.
Oh yeah. 7:30.
Yeah, if you want to do that, that's a Ghost Experience Wales thing. But if you want to do that, it's a £5. But I'll send you the link. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yep, that's fine.
So,
Pat, have you fallen asleep?
Right. So I tell you what, we'll get back with it. And as I say, Del, if anyone else interested in a ghostly thing, or is it just Del? Okay, just Del.
Just Del.
Right. Who wanted to ask me a question? Go on.
I did. I wanted to mention about the Nathaniel book you were going to have a look for me.
I thought I sent you an email on it.
No, I haven't received it.
Yeah, I sent it to you. I sent it to you the day you asked it for me. I sent you. I gotta. What I'm gonna do? I'm gonna have a quick look now. Hang on.
No, I haven't received it. Whether you, I don't know if you got the right. But you have
Right, hang
got
on.
my email.
Have you got it? Is it Civita?
Civiter. Siviter.
Okay, I'll just go and see what's here.
I'm just looking now. I haven't got it. It's definitely not in here.
I slaved over that. Flipping heck. Well, okay. I'm just going to double check. Everybody will just do this a minute. I'm just going to try and find this. Try Skype now. Right. Not you. I'm going to see if I can get it.
Can you use this instead of Skype?
Yeah. Oh, here we go. It's. I got it here. I did.
Yeah.
It did go. It's go. We send you out notes, and the first title I sent it on Thursday the 26th.
I'm looking here and I can't see it.
I tell you what. Right, I'm going to re-forward it to you now.
Good. I'm very grateful.
Yeah, I did that straight away.
Thank you. Well, I'm
Yep.
sorry I couldn't find it.
Right. There you go.
You know.
Have you just got it?
Let me have a look.
Whilst Anne is looking for that, I'm going to mention, look out for your newsletters this week, and obviously you will have the notes sent to you about this, probably on Sunday, and I'll speak to you on Monday. We'll do Zoom next week, and mention about the other classes if anyone's interested in them. They're starting next Wednesday evening. We're looking at the Archaeology of Archaeology. That's next week. What else was I going to say? Have you found that now, Anne?
No, it's not come. No.
Right,
Last
okay.
one I got was from somebody else, and
Well, I'll send it to you again. It may have gone into your junk pile. Hang on, I have to do it again. Hang on.
nothing's come.
Right, if you generically give me your email address, ANNSIVITER@outlook.com. Right, I sent it. You've had it 3 times now. I'm just gonna close the door.
Sorry about this.
Right. So let's get back into this. Where were we? Have you got it, Anne?
No, it hasn't come.
Okay, I don't know what that is.
Jackson,
Right.
it's not from you.
Okay,
No, I don't know what's the matter with it.
I did send it.
Yeah, but I've had this before. I don't trust the internet. I really don't trust
It's
emails.
Anne, it's probably gone to your junk mail.
To my what name?
Your junk mail.
Junk mail. Yeah. Oh, well, it might go there. I don't know.
Yes, it might go there. Yeah. So what we're gonna do? We're gonna crack on. So what we do know, we know a lot about. We're starting to build up a lot of information about this guy, and we're thinking that the instability he had when he was a child more than anything, loss of most of his family, and I just there are so few sources really when it comes to writing. Rome is always said to be a culture that's been written about quite a lot, but there's only a few writers' sources that are actually survived. If the people had written about Caligula had written about him fondly, then he would seemingly be more of a underrated figure than we're actually seeing. They present him as being extravagant, a sadist, a tyrant, sexual perversion. But on the backdrop of that, he was seen to build 2 massive aqueducts leading into Rome. And obviously, we've got the other achievements of his palaces, and we're talking about his ships and so on. And just a few other little facts that I chucked in this morning. He was into public reform. He was into this. This is a rather interesting thing, that in the year AD 38, a year into his reign, he ordered the Senate to publish where all the money from the state is being spent. Which was really unusual. He looked at it. Listen to this. This is the same guy, Caligula, who restored the practice of democratic elections. If somebody's so despotic, why would he do that? There's another thing as well. Is in AD 38, he paid people whose homes had been lost by fire. He abolished certain taxes. At gymnastic events, he ordered that prizes be given, right? So is this somebody who's an absolute despot? By around the year AD 39, there was some kind of a financial crisis developing. But again, we only hear about this from those 2 key historians, Suetonius and Cassius Dio, who are writing decades and decades after. So what I'd like to do is go back to the subject at hand, go back to those images and try to sort of thrash out what else we need to know about these barges. And there's a few things left to say. So let's go and do it. For what I seem to be happening is that this technology, Zoom is far superior to anything that we've done on Skype. Touch wood, we've never lost a connection in a class, but we can be teaching a Skype class and we're always losing the connection, which is really frustrating.
There is a message up that your broadband width is a bit low.
Yeah.
I'm getting that all the time. Your internet connection is unstable. I'm getting that all the time. But are you seeing this now in front of you?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now this is a lovely little reconstruction, but it's probably not as exaggerated as it should be. But what it's showing. It's showing 1 bank of oarsmen. Now, this is a rather interesting part of the story. It's said that when Caligula was so extravagant, right, that he had a galley built to sail across the Bay of Naples. Suetonius tells us that there were 8 banks of oars. No, that's right. No, not 8, 10 banks of oars. 10 banks of oars, right? What that means is if you've got 1 layer of oarsmen, you've got another layer of oarsmen, you've got 10 layers of oarsmen directly on top of each other, right? Mm. And the oars would be longer the higher you get. So in other words, 1 set of oars would row, then they would stop, and then the others would row, then they would stop, and then the others would row, then they would stop, and the ones below would row again. That's if you've got 3 banks of oars, 10 banks of oars. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is Suetonius was obviously lying about the galley that Caligula used on the Bay of Naples. So what else was Suetonius lying about? From the archaeological evidence, the barges on Lake Nemi only had 1 bank of oarsmen. And when you think about it, that ore itself is thicker than your arm, right? If you probably times that by twice the thickness of your arm, that is a small tree that you're rowing back and level, back and level, back and level as it goes through the water. In other words, feathering. That's a technique. Pull it back out the water level, pull it back out the level water. That's called feathering. And you'd have had more than one oarsman to actually do that. So we've done that little bit of detail. And the key, what I want to show you, the mistake I actually made on Tuesday, which I was corrected for and I was very grateful, in another image coming up, was these rudders. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 rudders. Now, this is rather interesting. This means that you've got oarsmen in the lake. Maybe it's sort of not moving a great deal, right? Remember, these vessels are very, very heavy. They've got very, very large anchors. And the oarsmen may have actually been for show. But the rudders are really important as well. You can actually move a vessel like this, you're just using the oarsman. You don't really need a rudder. The rudders might have just been for short bouts of movement. But we'll see what I mean in a short while. In the caption there, it says, the deck was never found. Archaeologists speculate the ship was plundered before being partly dismantled and sunk. The proper evidence tells us that that isn't the case, because the large amount of material that we found and other bits of decking and so on have been found tells us that our statement is entirely wrong. If we look at this as well, rather interesting thing there. That's one of the pumping vessels that was actually on Lake Nemi. And there you go. They've got a little bit of information there, 1.4 billion cubic feet of water. And there's the dictator himself. But I do believe that that image is not from Lake Nemi. I think that image is actually from the heart of Rome itself, just before lots of the buildings were being demolished. But that's another lecture altogether. So they're pumping in a lake for around 3 years. This wonderful diving bell construction in front of us. So what we've got, you're only going to dive using a level platform like this with a bell, right? If the water is very calm. On the Beaufort scale, you basically are on a very low Beaufort scale, very low wind. Because any instability, the bell's going to rock and water is going to fill in it. You're going to capsize, all terrible things, right? So you've got to have the level of the lake low, particularly this as a raft like this. And it says there in just a little caption at the bottom, mosaic and terracotta pipes found in 1827. Now, again, the interesting thing about the mosaics as well is that you've got some planking, probably cedar planking, because most of what we do find is cedar. So you've got the cedar there, and that would have been lined with lead. And on top of that, you would have had an aggregate mortar, and you'd have had another layer, and then you would have laid into the various layers the mosaic, which in turn would have made the vessel even heavier. Again, all of this tells you of a vessel that was top heavy. Again, look at the tessera again. They've been finding sections of tessera for quite some time. And these are in quite a good state of preservation. Again, if the decking timbers had been removed, right, these would be in a fragmentary form. So can we see where we're going with this? The exact history on the way this is being portrayed is the archaeological evidence is telling us more about the state of the structure for a long period of time than the historians want us to believe. The archaeology is telling us about the vessel, is speaking for the vessel, is speaking for Caligula, it's telling us more. And this is the mistake I made. The mistake I made when I presented this on Tuesday, I basically said, this is actually this is actually the stern of the vessel, and somebody said, no, what you've got, those chaps there, they're actually sat in where the that's basically the galley port. That's basically where all the galley oarsmen are. because that's what you see in the earlier image earlier on that I showed you, and that is one of the rudders. That is one of the ribs, and this is basically a reconstruction. And I'm so pleased I got something wrong. And there's something rather interesting about getting things wrong. It allows you to have a discussion, and you know, I'm so happy that people can come and say, you've got it wrong, brilliant, let's reassess it. And that doesn't have much movement there. It doesn't have much movement at all. You can see, so it would have just moved a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, which would have been enough to give this barge a little bit of maneuverability around the lake. You don't want too much maneuverability around the lake. Mind you, you're not going to get it because it's a heavy vessel. But if you've got a little bit of a wind, right, that could push the vessel into the shoreline. So you've got this, have a little bit of movement to keep the thing crashing against the shoreline. And that's what that is. That's one of the rudders. It's great. Absolutely great. And you've got two nice little eyes there. They've been finding, when they've been dredging up, they've been finding these eyes. They've been finding some part of the rigging, They've been finding all those little bits and pieces. Oh, I got to tell you, we've got a little bit of text coming up, which I didn't make much of earlier on, but I know you'll appreciate it, but we'll come on to that in a short while. What they've been doing a reconstruction of this vessel, one of the vessels, right? And this is just one keel. So that's just one set of timber. That timber itself, these lengths of timber, set the project back, the timber alone, 50,000 euros, which I don't know what the exchange rate is today, but it's basically the equivalent of 50,000 pounds. That's the timber alone. They've estimated that to rebuild the whole vessel will cost 10 million euros. I don't know if we're talking about labor then, because people are volunteering. The timber, okay, I would go with that, right? 10 million euros to reconstruct this. It's a masterful project. And then, have you calculated, is that the lead cost for the hull? What about the buildings on top of it? To be honest with you, that to me is enough. I don't need the rest of the structure constructed. That to me is enough. That shows you the power of this structure. This shows you how amazing this structure is. It's like a, in other words, it's like a floating flat or something. Anyway, again, that's talking about. So
is it?
Go on.
So is it being built now?
It's being built now, but I don't know.
Was that when it?
No, that was
somebody.
Yeah, that's where it's being built now, and I think that was about 2000 where they were building that, year 2000.
Oh, right.
And it's saying that about 10 million euros, and they're saying, obviously we need to have 5 keels, so that's really thick timber, and we're talking about 140 oak frames. So those are basically the very large ribbons that you're going to need, and 2 decks. It's quite phenomenal, this project. However, let's move on a little bit further because lots to go through. I'm just going to paraphrase through some of this. So obviously, Caligula was very fond of the water, was very fond of the lake, very fond of Diana, and why not? So it's a beautiful goddess. You're looking into the mirror itself. Caligula's fondness for ships was only part of his great obsession and flamboyance. We've mentioned this story about Suetonius. And we've mentioned about the 10 banks of oars, which is impossible. But we're talking about this vessel going across Naples, having baths to swim in, having various banqueting halls on this barge going across the River Naples, and flowering plant trees along it as well. There's also another exaggerated story that there is said that about 240 vessels were placed together over a 3-mile distance of the Bay of Bailey. 3 miles, 240 vessels from port to starboard And it's said that that was done so that Caligula could ride from one side of the lake to the next. And you're thinking, surely to God, you know, is that exaggerated? And it says in here, some scholars distrust historical accounts of Caligula's luxurious lifestyle. I, for one, believe that lots of it has been exaggerated. 1895, we've got another thing. An Italian naval colonel is enlisting the helps of expert divers to find the exact positions of the vessels. And there they find the exact positions of the vessels. And listen to this here. The vessels, the hulls buried in a sloping bed of mud, burdened by tons of marble, mosaics, bricks, and tile. It was ultimately decided that the only practical way to recover them was to lower the lake's water level. This was done under Mussolini. Lots of other little bits and pieces there that we've already done. And there's a few interesting things. One that's going to make you rather laugh. And I will let you know when it's coming. So in 1446, they started to realize there was something down there because fragments of wood were being dredged up, and their nets were being snagged and sort of underwater and tearing, and hooks were just breaking and all sorts of things. So they knew there was some substantial vessels down there. And this is the interesting one. In 1535, an engineer, Francesco de Marchi, explored Lake Nemi. He decided to put a wooden drum on his head and cut a hole through it and fit a glass port into it. And the drum covered only the diver's torso, leaving his legs and arms exposed from the elbow down. On one dive, in order to avoid entanglement, de Marchi descended without any pants. And listen to this last bit. Having brought with him a modest quantity of bread and cheese, he was soon accosted by a school of small fish who began nibbling on both the breadcrumbs and himself. Yeah, I thought you'd get that eventually. So we're discussing what happened in 1827 on this rather interesting diving bell, which was invented by Edmund Halley, by the way, in the Halley's Comet. And we're talking about a little bit more detail: marble, mosaic, tessera, bricks, nails, terracotta, pipes, all these other things were being brought up. And then we go to 1895. So moving on a little bit further, we've done that. Now what we need to do, we need to come to the end. I've actually come to the end a bit sooner than I should have. But that's fair enough. So
that's all right, don't worry.
That's fair enough. You know, I need to lie down after this.
We need to exercise.
Yeah, we do. In October, we'll do this in full. In October 1932, the second ship was hauled ashore. Scientists at the time knew relatively little about the conservation of waterlogged wood. But to the credit of those involved, the ships were covered with damp canvas to prevent rapid desiccation on the advice of Norwegian researchers. So I've already said I've had great experience with conserving vessels. Though the Nemi ships were given modest cover, it became clear within a year that exposure to their elements and changes in temperature were causing rapid deterioration. So this is where those hangars came into it. So tons of cement, bricks, and iron were donated, and lumber to build those museums, which still stand today. Now, if you weren't lucky, if you were lucky enough to see them before May the 30th, 1944, hang on a minute, there's something wrong with the dates. Hang on. No, there isn't. That's fine. I was thinking 1945 then, anyway. Right, on the night of May the 30th, 1944, the ships were set ablaze and destroyed. At that time, Allied forces were pursuing the retreating German army northwards through the Alban Hills towards Rome. So they needed to get through this area to actually get to Rome itself. On May the 28th, the German artillery post was established within 400 feet of the museum. According to museum guards, several marble columns within it were moved or broken in the days leading up to the fire. An official report filed in Rome later that year described the tragedy as a willful act on the part of the German soldiers. A German editorial blamed the destruction on American artillery fire. The true story of what happened that night will probably never be known. The only material untouched by the flames at Neve were the artifacts stored in Rome, and all the plans and documents had already been published by Guido Uccelli, hydraulic engineer, in 1940. Now, when you think about that description, when you think about John Romer's description where it goes, then when war came to Italy, the boats inside their hangars gave shelter to hundreds of refugees. Finally, in 1944, after Allied aeroplanes had bombed them, some retreating Germans set fire to the two splendid boats. They were completely consumed by the flames. Only the splendid empty space inside their hangar still remains, along with two small models, a display of faded photographs, an anchor, and a token of boats, and a vast anchor, a token of the boat's vast size and memory. And when you think about it, if the Americans had bombed the ships, the whole structure would have collapsed. So there's some shenanigans into the whole story. But the lead is the clue. It's likely that the lead had been removed. It's likely that the lead had been removed, and then the vessel set alight. But the strange thing is, the timber would have caused damage to the shell of the building. So also something not quite right about that. So the mystery will go on. The mystery of the vessels is a bit like the Amber Room. The Amber Room, there's no evidence to say where the Amber Room went. And there's something very suspicious about what happened to these vessels. I'm not saying they were taken apart and stored somewhere, because that would be a lot of material to hide somewhere. But what happened to the lead is a rather interesting story. You could get rid of the wood by setting light to it, but there you go. Right, are there any questions? All of you, you can put your mic back on, Pat. And before we ask any questions, are you all going to be here next week?
Yes.
Yes.
I know Dal's going to Cornwall, but he'll be back in time.
Yes, I'll be here.
Yes, I'll be here.
Right, so Del, I'll have a if you want to join us on Saturday evening, I will send you a link at before 7:30. Okay.
Is it the same link that's on the archaeology site?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Okay, so I can get through on that.
Yeah, you can. It's the one you've already had, but you'll have the same one sent to you. Yeah. So.
Okay, that's great.
Right. So. Right, if nobody else wants to ask about that, so next week I'm going to tell you. Then we'll ask if there's any questions. So I'm going to tell you what we're doing next week. It's the archaeology of Anne's washing machine. Next week we'll be doing a certain Russian general, won't we, Henry?
Oh, that one.
Yes, yes, and I have kept your notes. They are in my diary.
Is it?
A certain Russian general will be doing next week.
Oh.
We'll also be chucking in bodies of soldiers of Napoleon's army as well next week as well. And why not? There's nothing wrong with a rotting cadaver. I'm talking about rotting cadavers. Anne, have you got any questions today? Let's have one.
I haven't got one, I don't think.
No? Okay, Anne, that'll do you.
I actually, I was going to just say thank you, but
the thing is, I should be asking.
For setting this up, you know.
To keeping you going.
Yeah.
I tell you what, last Thursday I was absolutely knackered after doing this for over 5 hours, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, I bet you would be.
So, but not a problem. This is what you pay me to do, right? So, Del, any questions?
No questions.
Pat?
Waiting for next week.
Good.
Questions? Thank you very much.
No questions.
Just
You
keep us going.
all enjoyed this today?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Right. What about you, Anne?
Thank you.
At the other Anne, any questions? I haven't finished yet. No.
I think it's worked very well. I've enjoyed the way it's gone today.
Thank you.
I've been able to hear better than I usually can on. You know, we have it at Skype at Dreeners.
Yeah.
I've been able to hear today, so I've got more from it.
Well, we won't be transferring over to Zoom on the Skype course yet, but we're thinking about it. Right. Henri, you've got to ask one question. Everyone's voting now. 5 votes against 1. You've got to ask a question.
Right. Question. Lead, World War II. What would your obvious use be for lead?
Well,
to go
ammunition.
Yeah, but the thing is, I've actually looked into this, right? And lead with the mines in Germany, the Germans would have had access to the lead, right? However, it would be good to know precisely at what point the vessel was last seen. Because there's, from an engineering point of view, right? From an engineering point of view, one or two shells landing on those buildings would have the whole things would have gone down like a concertina. They're still standing, so no shells landed on them, right?
No.
That's the first fact.
No.
The other fact as well is if you to set light to the timber, right? To set light to the timber so that all the timber burns, you'd have had to have got rid of the lead, right? Being that no lead was found afterwards, there's no report of any lead. It apparently evaporated. Therefore, the lead must have been removed. But when? Was it removed by the Italians? Was it removed by the Germans?
Or the mafia?
You think it was the Italians?
To be honest with you, right? Isn't it a good thing of the Italians to have actually dismantled the vessels, sold on the lead, right, and then blame the Germans, and then the Germans blame the Americans, and the Italians then blame everyone. I don't know. No, the thing is, what I would like, I tried to go down this avenue, right, to see what the Germans were short of in 1944, right? And if you can work out the answer to that question, if it was lead, Henry, let us know next week.
I'll have a little ponder.
Okay.
So next week is to do some research into the background of Napoleon's invasion of Russia. Just the background. You don't need to do much of the archaeology, but that's where we come in next week. If there's no more questions, I appreciate you all joining us tonight. Anyone want to stay and have a chat afterwards? No?
No.
Thank you. See you Saturday or next week.
Okay then. So what we'll do...
I'd like to give you another email address for me.
I'll go for it.
Might come up with another one. Okay.
Okay. Well, you stay on there, Anne. So who have we lost? We've lost Del. So the other Anne will say goodbye to. See you, Anne.
Good night. Goodbye. See you next week.
Thanks
when you come back.
And Pat, I will say goodbye to you then, Pat.
Okay, goodbye.
Goodbye, Pat. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And Henry, are you off now?
Yep, I'll leave you in peace.
Henry, make sure you get that bus.
Document.
Yeah, I will carry on reading that document and make sure you get your bus.
Right, thank you very much.
See you,
Bye
Henry.
for now. Have a good time. Bye, Anne.
We will. And who else have we got left? There's only, everyone else is supposed to have gone. Right. So, Anne, what's your email address? The other Anne. Anne S.
Salopian, SALOPIAN SALOPIANN@gmail.com.
Right, run that past me again. SALOP.
Yes.
Yeah.
IANN @gmail.com.
Right. So SALOPINN.
Yes.
Salopine. Is that right?
Salopian. I used to live in Salop when I
Right.
got set this up.
So does that look right? SALO.
Miss the A out. It's Salop E-An. After the I, it's an A to say an at the end of the line.
SALOPAINN.
That's right.
Right. So you lived up by Chester, Wrexham way, yeah?
I lived in Knighton. I lived in Wales for the time.
Oh, you were one of those.
But my address was Salopia. It was Shropshire.
Did you know in the late 1990s we used to have a branch in Powers, Knighton.
All right. Yeah.
But this is the second most major crisis Archaeology Cymru's been through, and we've survived this one, but we didn't survive the last one. So, but this is good.
I'm so pleased you're keeping it going. It's been very enjoyable today, and thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, it's been good.
Exactly.
Thank you.
You meet strange people called Anne.
I hope I'm not strange.
No, Anne gets the medal for strange. She gets the medal.
I'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week. I'll get this email. I'm gonna get this email to you now, and you tell me whether you've got it. Okay?
I don't know why the other one didn't work. I'm sure, you know.
Okay, I'll do that now. Okay. Okay, then take care.
Yes.
See you, Anne. Bye. Bye. Bye.